This part of the kids' garden just a couple years ago was a really potholed road. So we're about as bad as you could get on soil. We're literally building on top of an old roadway. So compacted gravel, still patches of asphalt in some areas. And so a couple years ago, I came in here and dumped maybe like 3 inches or so of premium store-bought soil. So this is pretty much the only area that we actually bought and paid for soil. And by far it's the worst or the least productive, or the plants in here are much less happy than where we've been building our own soil around here. So I'm kind of now circling back a couple years later, and I'm just going to really enhance this soil here. So as I dig down, I can kind of see that I'm there just a couple inches down, and now I'm got into that compacted gravel. So I try to put an emphasis on planting things like daikon radishes, things that have really deep tap roots that will kind of drill down into that gravel, and then as that dies, it'll turn into a core of nice organic material. So we're kind of with plants spiking down into that gravel. And I can tell by looking at the plants that they are pretty unhappy and sort of stressed, just in browning of leaves as compared to any other areas. These strawberries are literally trying to escape the bed. All that nutrients that came in with that soil has pretty much leached out by now or been used up by the plants, so it's really tired soil right now. So what we're going to do is hopefully end up with maybe 2 or 3 foot high mound built with some really nice ingredients here. And we'll be using principles of soil building called Hugelkultur. We'll be taking a lot of pages from that book, but basically it's just mimicking how nature builds soil. So think of a forest, dropping leaves and branches and tree trunks keep falling and just building up layers of lovely organic material, and then just home for all sorts of nice soil biology in there. Some people would say to smother some of these plants. We'll smother it with the mound. We'll literally just start building up on top of this thing here. So, a couple things to keep in mind. This is south. The sun is coming from this way, so I'll have a higher edge of the hill on this north side to really capture almost like stadium seating for that sun. So we'll start building up higher and kind of slope down. First kind of layer, or the bottom substrate, I'm going to be putting in a lot of woody material here, and specifically what I'm always looking for are things like this here, which is a willow tree, and we can see it's already starting to re-sprout and grow. So willow is one of nature's best rooting hormones, so this will get put down as kind of like a base layer, and as this tries to regrow and as it breaks down, it's going to be releasing all sorts of nice rooting hormone into this. So I'm just going to put a nice kind of back bottom layer with these willow logs here. So that was probably all the willow I have. And then now I'm going to step down into kind of this smaller dimension of tree, and this is going to be mostly alder, which is probably my most desired soil building log and material because of the nutrients it brings and this nice quick breakdown and the habitat that it creates for mycelium and mushrooms. Mimicking like a forest as branches are falling. There we go. Now if you come up there, or even from there, you can probably see there's tons of gaps in there. So now I'm going to really try and fill this in with some other really good materials. And then kind of the next wave of stuff, I'll be putting in a lot of wood chips. And this is again alder wood chips. And then over here, we've got kind of that nice aged, broken down for a couple years wood chip of a lot of different types of trees. So I'll kind of be tossing these in and kind of shaking, rattling, even jumping on this thing to try and fill up as many of these nooks and crannies. I'm going to take a little pause there and start to put in some mycelium. So this is a bag of oyster mushroom mycelium that we expanded in some straw. And this is really what it's all about, and especially this whole layer that I put down is really going to get quickly taken over by this stuff, and this will be what's connecting all the plants and really helping to deliver messages and nutrients and make this a nice, robust, healthy ecosystem. So I'm just kind of crumbling this up as best as can be. Spreading that around. And this will quickly overtake even these large stumps. And in addition to just making the plants more robust, we'll also be harvesting delicious oyster mushrooms off of this bed. Here I've got just grass clippings, been dropped off by local landscapers. This is a lot of carbon that's already gone in there with the woody material. This will help to start bringing in some nice nitrogen. Here I am, just really getting in there, kind of like tucking things under any of these branches, kind of getting rid of the huge air gaps in there, getting everything into contact, not over compressing anything, but just getting things connected. Let's see what we want next. Well, I'm on that nitrogen kick from the grass clippings. I'll probably put in a little bit of, this is wonderful organic compost from Wild Rivers Market. This will be wonderful, again, for more nitrogen, and the worms in particular are just going to gobble this up. Beautiful caulifractal, as the kids say, the Romanesco broccoli. And then I'm going to get in a little bit of more what we think of as like soil or finished soil, things that you might buy, but again, all these things were scrounged, and I don't think we paid for a single thing in here. So let's look at the soils that we'll be kind of mixing in. I've got probably 2 different things I'll be working with today. This is just some really nice Fort Dick farm soil that I just dug up from where I live. In fact, it was just a pile of weeds that I had pulled from the field that broke down. And this will be a real nice structure for that. And then here is just like what we would say, like really nice potting soil that was donated to the kids' garden. And if you see on top of here for the past month or 2, I just put down a little bit of that oyster mushroom spawn on some straw that I had on top of here. So all of this is nicely inoculated with that oyster mushroom as well. So we'll probably get a little bit of that down in there, and then I'll be reserving a lot of this stuff for kind of the top layer. We almost think of it like icing on a cake with this. But let's get some down in there in the mix of all this. Keep repeating, right? And I'm just trying to not put too much of one thing in one layer. It wouldn't be bad, but I'm just kind of trying to get as much diversity and kind of a blending of everything. Probably the only other ingredient that I haven't mentioned yet is this real nice compost that we built over there in the Soil Builders Club. This picked up from the local grocery stores, restaurants, and stuff that we just pull from the kids' garden here. Real nice worm-laden stuff. So that's like instant ready nutrients, especially while all that woody material takes a little bit of time to break down into beautiful soil. This is ready for action. Especially since that's where our initial worm population is, I'll keep coming with some of this compost. Check this stuff out. So another Wild Rivers Market contribution, and this is from their juice bar. So that's just pulp from their juicing machines. And all the other good stuff in the soil. Without much rhyme or reason, I'm just coming back to a little bit more of that oyster, the mushroom spawn, especially since I'm seeing this bear the alder wood chips. Alders being one of the favorite things for these oyster mushrooms to grow on. So this will turn into a lovely vein of mycelium and will end up fruiting above the soil as well. Carbons through the wood chips and some nice green nitrogen from the grass clippings. Now I'm back to some soil. So we kind of have like big tree limbs, but I'd love to see if I can find something more like in this size and get a nice layer of like the smaller branches. Ideally alder or a fruit tree would be my dream scenario. So I'm gonna take a little scrounge around our brush pile and see if we can score some. All right, so we were very successful at finding kind of the next step down size of woody material at the kids' garden, and you guys are super welcome to come to the kids' garden and pick up almost any of these soil ingredients. which we usually have on hand. Before I'm going to add these sticks, I'm just going to do another kind of process of like wiggle, shaking, and tucking. This is probably the most important takeaway besides the quality of the ingredients that you put in. This whole idea of kind of like settling it down, so we're not leaving these big huge air pockets, right? If you have the big huge air pockets, you're going to take an extra year or two to get whatever that pocket area is broken down and into really good active soil. So this kind of like jumping on it, tucking, shaking is like really worth your while. It's a nice check-in as well of kind of like the moisture and the feel of it. And thankfully today is a nice kind of overcast, sort of cool day. If it was warm, sunny, I'd probably be spraying this down occasionally with some water. But I can tell that this is really nice hydrated stuff. So I'm liking the feel of this right now. All right, I feel pretty well tucked in. And we'll do a little veneer of these smaller twigs. And maybe it's good to point out, so like at the point of the mound that we're getting into, this stuff especially, even these things are going to be in the area that we'll be like planting some of the plants we'll be putting in here. So in maybe a couple weeks, I'll be coming in here and planting some plants, and I might hit stuff like this, and I'll just have to kind of adjust that first planting, but then you'll be amazed at how quickly this, even something like this, will break down into really beautiful soft soil. So probably even by the fall time, I would expect to have a hard time finding this. We've got a blend, but it's mostly something called bokashi, which is a fermented, gosh, I guess we would say bacteria, or it definitely helps to create like beneficial strains of bacteria. So we're going to sprinkle that all around. You could use this to, in essence, like pickle or ferment your compost. Some people use to even break down things like bones and meat and stuff like that, right? So this will kind of get into some of the biology that wants to be a little bit more anaerobic. There. And I've also got some stuff called Ocean's Bounty, which is like ground up seashells and a great locally produced fertilizer. And keep in mind, all this stuff that we're throwing in here is kind of like a time-release fertilizer. So as these branches and sticks and everything else break down, I won't have to be paying for or applying lots of fertilizer. It'll just keep feeding the soil and the soil web. And we can also think of this woody material kind of like a sponge, so it'll soak up water. So I'll have to water this bed much less than I would if it was just a typical soil bed. So this will kind of hold water like a sponge, and when the surrounding soil is dry, it'll wick that soil out. I mean, we can also think of this kind of like our skeletal system in our body. We'd be just a floppy mess without our bones, so this kind of gives our bed structure. Other people compare this kind of concept of all that woody material, and especially the mycelium that will run all throughout this, also kind of like internet that is connecting all of the plants and the roots, and is going to be exchanging and sharing nutrients and information, and just making this a real connected, cohesive ecosystem. This process is super forgiving as far as kind of working with what you got. If I had manure, I would 100% be putting it in there. Just blended it in with all the rest of this. We've used a lot of horse manure, a lot of bunny manure. I kind of take what comes to us and then work with it. I guess the most important thing is just having a decent blend of those carbons and the nitrogens, right? So think of like browns typically for carbons, all this woody material, the chips, the wood chips, the straw, that would all be carbon. And again, the grass clippings, compost from your kitchen. I'll definitely be topping the bed with some straw, but I'm just gonna go ahead and sprinkle this down in here as a intermediary layer. This is rice straw, which won't sprout like your more typical straw or hay. Well, I'll use it as a mulch on top, right? So I'll probably exhaust the rest of most of my ingredients, and then I'll use all the rest of the fine soil. So we have, again, think like icing on a cake of this real nice, soft, ready to go soil, right? But if that was just sitting there exposed to the wind, the sun, all the elements, this would blow away, it would get bleached out. So I'll be topping with a mulch layer of straw. And I could use wood chips or whatever, but I'll use this straw for a number of reasons, and that'll hold in moisture, it'll stop some weed seeds from sprouting, and kind of be that protective layer on this fragile mound. We're in like really exposed conditions here, so that'll keep it all nice and safe. Coffee grounds is something else I'm usually putting in, but I don't have with me today. Leaves would be wonderful, especially alder leaves, or I'm usually doing more hardwood leaves. I would probably just encourage you to stay away from putting things like redwood or maybe cedar into this, unless you're growing those type of plants. But those can be allelopathic or can kind of inhibit the growth of soil. I'll come around this side here, which again is kind of the north side or the shady side if the sun is coming from the south. And you'll see I've got those first things we put down, those big willow logs. This will have, if we're successful, just huge, delicious, beautiful fruiting bodies of mushrooms there. So we can harvest our fruit, our berries, our plants, and even some mushrooms here. North side, shadier, cooler, a little more mushroom. This is that big kind of main mass that will someday be a home to a large fruit tree. And this just kind of like guarantees that I can really immediately plant tender, fragile things in here right away. Probably worth pointing out that this can be done on any scale, right? I could be doing this only a couple inches high inside of any raised beds that I'm doing. You can see different heights throughout the garden here, especially that huge mound, which is probably a good 5 feet tall or so. And that'll be where we put some of our largest trees. The scale can be customized to whatever space you're working with, whatever inputs you can get your hands on. Is really forgiving. After I put the straw on, I'll definitely spray this down, so it'll kind of give a nice moist layer to the top. I'll come back in a future wave and I'll kind of really doll up this front edge, but I'm really happy getting the critical mass of this bed established. It's just really amazing to watch this thing kind of take on a life of its own and observe it over periods of time.